From the Pyle Media Ventures studio in Noblesville, Indiana, this is the Jacob Pyle Show. With tonight's guest, author Joe LeValley, and the host of our show, Jacob Pyle.
Thank you, Zach, and hello, everybody. Welcome to the Jacob Pyle Show. My name is Jacob Pyle. For the next 30 minutes, unscripted conversations, but with a difference. No shouting, no cussing. All topics that we are discussing on the Jacob Pyle Show have been approved by me before the show taping. My guest for tonight is a former journalist and business executive. He is also an author of several award-winning mystery thriller novels, a musician, as well as a public speaker. His book series is entitled Tony Harrington Novels, can be found on his website, www.josephlevalley.com, or at your local bookstore. Joining us now via Zoom is our guest for this week, Joe LeValley. Joe, welcome.
Well, thanks, Jacob. It's an honor to be with you.
Now, you're joining us from your home in Dallas County, Acreage, Iowa, but I understand you have a connection with, well, not Noblesville, Indiana, but Marion, Indiana. Tell us about that.
Well, my mother grew up in Marion. She and her brother and my grandparents. So when I was a kid, I went to Marion every summer to visit my grandparents. Have many fond memories of hanging out at my grandparents' place in Marion. My grandmother had a little clothing shop for kids called the Tot Shop. And we were always treated like royalty, you know, when the grandkids come to visit. It was always a very fun time. And
now, do you still have family that lives in Marion, Indiana?
no, sadly, my grandparents passed away, and my uncle moved down to Bloomington, where he went to college, and so I don't have any family left there, but certainly a lot of fond memories there.
All right. So moving on with our interview here. Go ahead and tell us a little something about yourself.
Well, I grew up in Iowa, and I've always loved to write. My family were big readers, and I certainly read a lot. But for me, it always seemed like if you're going to read a lot, you should also write a lot. And I've just been writing for as long as I can remember. I was the irritating kid in school, and the teacher assigned a 3 to 5 page original story. I turned in 26 pages. So I just love to write. And as a result, I went to journalism school. I have a bachelor's in journalism from Drake University here in Iowa. And my first career, I went to work as a newspaper reporter covering crime and criminal justice. So I spent a lot of time riding around with cops. I had a lot of incredible experiences as a reporter, some exciting and fascinating, some tragic, of course. Had my life threatened. I had had the late night phone call from an inside source tipping me off to a crime they were covering up, and all those kinds of things happened. And in the course of my reporting, I covered 8 homicides, 2 of which were double murders, and 6 of those went to trial. So I sat through 6 murder trials. And it was while I was sitting in a murder trial that I had the idea for my first novel. So this was a long time ago. I was a young single guy when I was a reporter, and I had this idea for a novel where they say write what you know. So my idea was to write about a young single newspaper reporter who's sitting in a murder trial and decides the guy on trial didn't do it. And so he goes looking for the real killer and uncovers a sinister plot going on behind the scenes. So that first book I toyed with for years. After 7 years in newspapers, I moved on to corporate communications, and I got my MBA, and I got promoted at work, and I spent basically 30 years as an executive doing all kinds of administrative work, most of it related to writing, public relations, marketing, strategic planning, government relations, things like that. But all that time, I was thinking about and toying with this novel that I had an idea for. And finally, in about 2016, as I was nearing retirement, I finished the book and never really expected to publish it. I just thought I'd print 6 copies for my kids and that would be the end of it. But when I retired in 2018, I thought, well, now I have the time and the interest, so maybe I should publish it. And so the first book came out at the end of 2018. It's called Burying the Lead. That's a newspaper expression you may be aware of. It means when the important facts of a story are hidden down in the body of the story where they're not obvious. Seemed like a cool title for a murder mystery, since what's going on the surface is this murder trial, but the true facts of the story are what's going on down underneath, if you will, hidden from view. So it's called Burying the Lead, and LEDE is the way that a newsroom spells the lead of a news story. And so this book came out in December of 2018, and it won 2 awards and sold out its first printing. And I was astonished. I often say no one was more surprised than me, except my wife, who was probably more surprised than me. But in any case, I thought, well, maybe if people actually enjoy this stuff, maybe I should do more of it. But the other thing that happened that really surprised me, I always thought, all those years I toyed with that first novel, I created this character of Tony Harrington and his boss and his best friend and his girlfriend and all these characters, his parents. And I really thought at the end of that 30-year journey, when the first book was finished, that those characters would go away. When I go out and speak to groups, I often start my author talk by saying I have an imaginary friend, because this character, Tony Harrington, really lived in my head for 30 years. But I also, as I said, I thought when the book was done, that would go away. And to my surprise, it didn't. So then I had 2 reasons to write a second book. One, I'd proven with the first book that I could do it and do it successfully. And then secondly, I still had this cast of characters in my head that were clamoring for attention. And so I decided to write a second book. And I needed a big topic. I don't want to give too much away about the first book, but this sinister plot going on behind the scenes is kind of a big deal, and so I didn't think I could follow that with a simple, cozy mystery, if you will. So I went looking for a big topic, and I chose human trafficking. It was in the news at the time, and it's a big, important topic. It's full of things that are good for a writer, emotional issues, legal issues, societal issues, et cetera, et cetera. And so I did the research, and everything I learned was horrible. The world of human trafficking is a horrific world. But I stuck with it, and I wrote a book. Very different writing experience from the first one. The second book is called Cry from an Unknown Grave.
Okay, I hate to interrupt you, Joe Joe LeValley, but we have to take a break. We will come back, and we will be back. When we come back, we will have part 2 of our conversation with Joe LeValley as he talks about his second book. Go ahead and show the book real quick. The Cry from the Grave. He's gonna tell us more about that when we come back from this break. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Jacob Pyle Show. My guest for tonight is author, public speaker, and musician Joe LeValley. His book series is entitled Tony Harrington Novels and can be found on his website, www.josephlevalley.com, or at your local bookstore. Now, when we had to stop for a commercial break, you were just about ready to tell us about your second book, which is called
Cry from an Unknown Grave. And it's the same main character, Tony Harrington, a young newspaper reporter, gets a phone call from a girl who escaped from human traffickers asking for his help, and he proceeds to get on the trail of this group of very nasty people who are doing terrible things and tries to bring them to justice and rescue a group of girls who are being abused. I mentioned it was a very different writing experience, and the first book, start to finish, took 33 years. This book I wrote, it's actually longer by 25 pages or so. I wrote this book in 33 days. Once I started writing it, I just couldn't stop. I was up every night till 2 or 3 in the morning. And it just poured out of me. And I'm proud of it as a story. One of the national reviewers said not only entertaining, but important. And I was very proud of that. As I mentioned, human trafficking is a horrible world, and I think everybody should know a little bit about it. It's not what most people think it is, and I certainly learned a great deal doing the research that I hadn't known before. I don't pretend to be an expert, but I learned enough to write one book about it. So then COVID hit, and we were in lockdown, so I wrote 3 more novels. The third one's called The Third Side of Murder. In it, Tony's young cousin, who's the ballet dancer pictured on the cover, she dies in Italy, and he accompanies his mother back to Italy to the family funeral, and decides maybe his cousin's death wasn't an accident, starts digging into it, and follows a suspect back to New York City. So all of the third book takes place in Italy and New York. It was kind of fun to see a relatively normal Iowa guy out of his element chasing bad guys in exotic places. And then the fourth book came out in 2020, I believe. It's called Performing Murder, and in it, Hollywood comes to Iowa to film a movie on location. That happens from time to time. People are aware of The Bridges of Madison County or Field of Dreams, movies like that were filmed in Iowa. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to see how my fictional small town reacts to having a bunch of famous movie stars in town. One of the actresses is murdered in Iowa, and Tony is involved in investigating her death. It has an interesting tie to his family's past, which was kind of fun to explore. So that was book 4. Book 5 came out in early 2023, called The Sophocles Rule. And in that book, he's on a stakeout with a friend from the DCI, the state investigative organization, and they flip a coin to see who's going to buy lunch. he sees something unusual about the coin, starts looking into it. Turns out he's investigating a 60-year-old crime. And as he starts to uncover some things about that, he sparks two new murders. Interesting thing about books 4, 5, and 6, and we've talked about 4 and 5, is the girlfriend in these books is smarter than he is. So at the end of this book, the girlfriend actually solves the final mystery, which is kind of fun to have to create this relationship where a reasonably smart, capable guy has an even smarter, more capable girlfriend. And I really like that relationship. She's an actress. He meets her in book 4 when she's in Iowa filming that movie. So it's also been very interesting to explore a relationship between an Iowa newspaper reporter who makes very little money dating a Hollywood actress who makes a lot of money. Their worlds are very different, and as they try to bring them together, it's very interesting. At least I hope it is. Final book, this just came out last November of 23. It's called 3 Weeks in Winter. And this is much more Tom Clancy-ish, if you will. It's, well, just to give you a quick synopsis, Tony goes to Chicago to look into the death of someone from this fictional Iowa town. And as he's investigating the death in Chicago, he stumbles across a group of domestic terrorists who are planning something pretty horrible, and he helps to chase that down. But because the CIA gets involved, the bad guys have bought their weapons from the Russians, so there's a spy element. There's a couple of scenes that take place in Russia. There's airplanes, as you can see from the cover, that get involved. So it's been compared by a couple of different reviewers to Tom Clancy, which of course I'm honored to see. But it's a very different kind of story. Still Tony Harrington, but much more of a thriller than a traditional type of whodunit. So those are the 6 books, all published in the past 5.5 years, and I'm actually writing 2 more at the moment, book 7 in the Tony series, and then a 8th book that's a whole different thing altogether.
Yeah. Out of the 6 books that you just showed our viewers here, which book was, I guess you could say, the most fun to write?
Oh, that's a good way to ask the question. Sometimes I get asked which one's my favorite, and that's impossible for a writer to choose. But which one was the most fun to write? That's a different kind of question. And again, it's hard because I enjoy writing so much. But let me answer it 3 ways. One, in this 3rd book, it was fun to write about Italy and New York. I've been fortunate to have spent some time in both places, and I love them both. And so it was fun to explore this idea of this Iowa guy in these places far from Iowa. So that was fun. And then, as I mentioned in the 4th book, it was fun to explore how small town Iowa reacts to these movie stars. And I think also this family connection to his past was interesting to explore. There's also, in book 4, I thought of a way to murder someone that I've never seen before in a book. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but to a mystery writer, coming up with ways to murder people is very difficult because there's thousands and thousands of murder mysteries, and there's only so many ways to kill another human being. and it was fun to think of a way to kill someone um, in this book that I'd never seen before. Um, and then the most recent book was fun just because it's more of a spy story, less of a traditional mystery, more of a thriller. And again, the girlfriend, Darcy Gilson, is instrumental, maybe more than Tony, responsible for if solving is probably not the right word, but saving the world, if you will, stopping the terrorists before anything really horrible happens.
All right, I have to stop you there because we need to take a break again. When we come back, I will have a preview of next week's show, and we will conclude our conversation with Joe LeValley, author of those 6 amazing books. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Jacob Pyle Show. My guest for tonight is author, public speaker, and musician Joe LeValley. His book series is entitled Tony Harrington Novels and can be found on his website, www.josephlevalley.com, or at your local bookstore. I hope you can join us next week on the Jacob Pyle Show, where my guest will be author Frederick Golder. Okay, so when we had to stop for commercial, you were finishing it. I asked this question: what was your most favorite book to write? And go ahead and finish. Go ahead and finish your thought.
Well, I think as I mentioned, those 3 that I mentioned were probably the most fun, and I appreciate the way you worded the question. But just to reiterate, I just love to write. So for me, it's not work. Whenever I do an author talk and someone expresses some admiration for how hard I've worked, I just shake my head and say, no, that's like telling somebody who likes to hunt how much you admire them for working so hard as a hunter, or likes to fish, et cetera, et cetera. For me, writing is entertaining, is fun, is my hobby as well as my avocation or whatever. So yeah, I enjoy it, and I appreciate your references to the website. LeValley is spelled L-E Valley, and so if you go to josephlevalley.com, you can see more information about the books. You can read some reviews. You can see a schedule of some of my author appearances. And of course, you can always order a book right off the website. They're available anywhere. They're in what's called national distribution. My publisher arranges that. And so any bookstore in North America can order them if they're not on the shelves already. Any library can get them through their regular library channels. So if you'd rather not spend the money, go to your local library and ask them to get it in. And I'm really surprised and honored by the fact that they've had some success. I don't want to overstate it. I'm not a New York Times best-selling author, but they do far better than most mysteries. And it's really been gratifying to get the feedback I get from readers who really like them. It's also fun. Every once in a while, you get the out of left field comment. So, for example, I got an email from a woman saying, I read your first book, just thought you'd like to know I loved it. And it was the IT vice president from a bank in Vienna, Austria. So that was kind of fun. I had a similar email from a California associate justice in the federal appeals court in California. So you get those kinds of emails and comments on social media. It really makes your day. So it's been a very rewarding, surprising twist to my later years and my third career, if you will.
Now, in addition, you've been talking a lot about your novels today, but I have to mention this. You are also a musician. Tell us how you ended up doing that.
Yeah, I'm a musician primarily because I'm a terrible athlete. I couldn't catch a ball to save my life. And growing up in small town Iowa, if you're not an athlete, you're not anybody. And so I turned to music. You know, it was the days of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and music was a very big deal. Probably, I mean, it still is, obviously, but those are very exciting times in the music world. And I bought a set of drums with my paper route money and started playing with my friends, and we created a pretty good, pretty successful rock group. Four of us played together for several years, traveled all over Iowa and a couple other states. We were on local television a couple times. We went in the recording studio and recorded some original music, and so it was a very exciting time. To give you an idea how hard we worked, in the middle of that, when we were really established as a rock group, we had a year where we played 169 nights in one calendar year. And we were full-time college students at the time. I look back on it and you wonder, how did you survive that? Because it's not like we were a house band somewhere. These are gigs where we were getting in the car and pulling a trailer, or for a while had a separate truck that hauled our gear, and we were driving all over the place and somehow making it back to school, going to enough classes to pass. So yeah, it was a very exciting time. And then later, when I was a working adult, when I got married and had kids, the music stuff scaled back, but I've always had my hands in. I play in church on Sundays. I've played in different groups, less intensively. When I was still single, a second group I played in up in North Iowa was a country rock group. That group also worked a lot, basically every weekend we wanted to. But mostly as an adult, especially after I was married, then we would play a few times a year rather than a few times a week. But I've always had my hand in. I've done some composing, probably written 40 songs over the years. And I just really, really enjoy it as a hobby. I don't pretend to be a great musician, but I've done it long enough that I consider myself competent. And if someone's interested, there's a music video I did for Mercy Medical Center in Des Moines years ago, is on YouTube. If you go to Joseph LeValley on YouTube, you'll find one of my original songs in a music video that I did for the hospital. If you go to my website, you can hear additional original music under the music tab on my website. So you get a flavor of what I've done that way. But I had a lot of fun, met a lot of wonderful people, had some crazy experiences, a couple of near-death experiences on the highway. But all in all, feel very blessed to have had music be a big part of my life.
All right. As we always say around here, this conversation could go on forever if we wanted it to, but as far as the show is concerned, we have to end our conversation here because we are almost out of time. My guest has been Joe LeValley. His book series is entitled Tony Harrington Novels. It can be found on his website, www.joelevalley.com or at your local bookstore. Thank you for joining us, Joe. We had a good conversation today. I'll be back next week with another guest to talk to you. Until then, for Joe LeValley, Zach Brown, and all of us on the Jacob Pyle Show, I'm Jacob Pyle. Thank you all for watching, and good night, everybody.
If you want to be a guest on the Jacob Pyle Show, or if you'd like a DVD copy of tonight's program, send Jacob an email. His email address is jtpyle1@aol.com. Or if you're ordering a DVD copy of tonight's program, send $10 check or money order to the Jacob Pyle Show, care of Pyle Media Ventures. Post Office Box 154, Noblesville, Indiana 46061. Please include the air date seen on your screen when ordering. Residents outside of Indiana add $5 shipping and handling. This is Zach Brown speaking for the Jacob Pyle Show, a Pyle Media Ventures presentation. This program has been pre-recorded.